For over a decade, mountain monsters followed the AIMS team as they hunted creatures most people only whispered about: the wolfman, the grassman, the mothman. But few knew that behind the laughter and legends, something darker was unfolding. Recently, longtime investigator Jeff Headlee broke his silence. What he described wasn't just another hunt gone wrong. It was an encounter so disturbing, it changed the team forever. The night they stopped filming wasn't planned, it was survival. And after hearing Jeff's account, you'll understand why mountain monsters never return the same. Make sure you're subscribed. What you're about to hear is chilling. For years, Jeff Headlee had been the AIMS team's anchor, the calm voice behind the chaos. While Trapper led the hunts and Buck charged headfirst into danger, Jeff stayed behind the monitors, logging coordinates, mapping sightings, and decoding patterns most viewers never noted. But in the months before mountain monsters quietly ended, Jeff began seeing something that made his stomach twist. The reports didn't make sense anymore. Creature sightings were multiplying, often on the same night, in towns separated by miles of solid mountain. Witnesses described the same thing: glowing eyes, rotten stench, heavy breathing, and footprints that vanished mid-trail. It wasn't the number of encounters that bothered Jeff, it was that they were overlapping, like one thing moving in several places at once. When Destination America pushed the AIMS crew to return to an old hunting ground, a hollow deep in the Monongahela National Forest, Jeff protested. That stretch of land had a reputation even locals wouldn't joke about. Trapper once called it the place the woods breathe, a spot where compasses spun, batteries died, and voices echoed from nowhere. They had filmed there years before, but after one night of unexplainable interference, it was banned from the production list. This time, though, producers wanted bigger scares, and they knew that Hollow carried a legend worth ratings. So, they went back. The crew arrived just before dusk, the smell of wet pine thick in the air. Jeff, standing near the base monitors, couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. And not just by the crew or locals. The woods were wrong, he said later. Too quiet. Even the wind didn't sound right. He logged their coordinates and marked the time: 7:43 p.m. It would be the last clear entry he ever made. By nightfall, the laughter that usually filled camp had stopped. Even Buck, who could make light of anything, sat quietly by the fire. Something about those woods felt heavier than before, like the mountain itself was listening. Jeff glanced at his monitors one last time before turning in. Everything read normal, except for one line of text that appeared across his GPS screen just before midnight. It's already here. The next morning, Jeff tried to brush off what he saw on the GPS. A glitch, he told himself. Static, maybe a prank from one of the crew. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The data had come through the encrypted channel, the same one used for base communication. Someone, or something, had accessed their feed. He didn't tell the others. Not yet. That day, they met with a local trapper named Harris, a quiet man in his 60s who refused to go near the ridge after dark. He claimed the creature people were seeing wasn't new. It had been around for generations. "My granddad called it the wood devil," he told Jeff. "Said it don't hunt for food. It hunts to remind you it's still here." Harris's voice cracked when he added, "You don't find it. It finds you." Back at camp, Jeff pulled up his historical logs. The stories lined up eerily well. Every decade, another spike of sightings, always around the same hollow. Even the weather patterns matched: thick fog, sudden magnetic shifts, and reports of livestock torn apart without blood loss. Jeff's unease deepened. He'd been the skeptic of the group for years, the one who balanced Trapper's instincts with logic and science. But that night, as he watched the wind move unnaturally through the trees, even he began to question what was real. Around 11 p.m., the sensors started tripping, one after another, forming a perfect circle around camp. It wasn't random movement, it was deliberate. Russell called out, "Could be deer," but Jeff shook his head. Deer don't move in a ring. Then came the smell, thick, metallic, and sour, like rust and rain mixed with decay. Buck covered his nose and said, "Something died out here." But Jeff recognized it from an earlier hunt years ago, that same sulfur stench before their equipment had fried. The perimeter lights flickered, the woods went silent, and through the static of the night vision feed, Jeff caught a glimpse of something between two trees, tall, broad, and motionless. He tried to focus the camera, but the image distorted into static. And then, through the headset, a low voice, voice, not human, not digital, whispered back the same words he saw the night before. "It's already here." By the third day, the AIMS crew had settled into their pattern, set traps, scan the perimeter, monitor the feed, but nothing about this hunt felt normal. Jeff was running diagnostics on the sensors when his laptop suddenly reset. Every file he'd logged since arriving in the hollow was gone, not deleted, erased. Even the metadata showed no trace of existence. When he tried to reconnect to the network, the GPS refused to lock onto their coordinates. The screen flashed a single message: "No fix found." He called to Buck and Russell, asking if their equipment had glitched, but they hadn't noticed anything wrong. It was only Jeff's station. "It's like we're off the map," he said, half joking. But when he looked at the compass, his stomach dropped. The needle spun endlessly, refusing to settle on north. At 8:42 p.m., the motion sensors picked up multiple heat signatures about 200 yards out. Jeff switched to thermal imaging, expecting deer or bear. Instead, the shapes stood upright, tall, symmetrical, and moving in synchronization like a coordinated group. He counted 3, then 4, then 5 figures weaving between trees. Their body temperatures were too consistent for animals. "That's not random movement," Jeff said. "That's formation." Russell and Huckleberry moved toward the ridge with flashlights, while Jeff monitored from camp. Through his headset, the static grew thicker, intercut with faint breathing sound. "Say again?" he asked, but the line was gone. Then the camera feed flickered, just long enough for him to see one of the shapes break formation and rush toward the ridge. Seconds later, a flare lit the sky, turning the forest crimson. The figures vanished instantly, but a roar echoed across the valley, so deep it vibrated the monitors. Buck's voice came through, shouting, "It's circling us! Move!" The radio crackled, then died again. Jeff grabbed his backup transmitter and tried to triangulate their location, but the system glitched and froze. On the screen, the data scrambled into letters like something was typing back. It spelled a single phrase before shutting off completely: "Don't follow." Jeff stared at the words, frozen. For the first time in years of investigating, he wasn't thinking about evidence or proof. He was thinking about escape. Night fell like a curtain, fast and suffocating. The campfire that once offered comfort now seemed too bright, too loud, like it was daring whatever was out there to come closer. Jeff sat hunched over his monitors, trying to restore the thermal feed, but every camera blinked in and out of static. He could still hear the low hum of the power units, but the signal was being jammed. Something nearby was emitting interference strong enough to shut down their entire system. Then, out of nowhere, one of the cameras came back online. The feed was shaky, snowing with distortion, but something moved across the frame, a hulking silhouette just at the edge of the light. Its height was impossible to miss, easily 8 feet, its shoulders massive, its head sloped forward. Jeff tried to zoom in, but the system froze. When the picture cleared again, the creature was gone. "Something's in the trees," Buck whispered over the comms. "It's watching us." Jeff looked up from the screen and scanned the ridge with his flashlight. Every sound was amplified, the crack of branches, the rustle of leaves, but the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Around 2:14 a.m., a deep vibration rolled through the ground, like a distant impact. The motion sensors all triggered at once. Lights along the perimeter began to strobe red. Huckleberry shouted from his post, "It's behind us!" Jeff swung the camera, catching only the blur of movement. A massive figure darting between trees with inhuman speed. Then came the sound that froze every man in place. A roar. Not animal, not mechanical. Something between a scream and thunder, layered with frequencies Jeff's equipment couldn't even register. The air itself seemed to distort. "Shut the lights!" he yelled. Everything went dark. For a long moment, the only sound was the pounding of their own hearts. Jeff felt a heavy presence just beyond the tree line. He didn't see it, but he knew it was there, staring straight at them. The equipment crackled, lights blinked back on, and one camera feed briefly flashed to life. In that instant, Jeff saw it, close, clear, and deliberate. A pair of glowing amber eyes staring directly into the lens. Then, every screen went black. The silence after those eyes vanished was worse than the noise that came before. No one moved for several seconds, afraid even to breathe. Then Buck whispered, "It's in the camp," and that was all it took. Flashlights flicked on, weapons drawn, and the team scrambled to regroup. Jeff slammed his laptop shut and grabbed his gear. The monitors were fried. The entire rig reeked of ozone, the metallic smell of burnt circuitry. Whatever had interfered wasn't just energy, it was targeted. "Back to the trucks," Russell barked. Now, they moved fast, lights bouncing through the trees. The woods that had once felt familiar now looked alien, twisted shadows, every trunk a potential shape waiting to move. Every few steps came the same sound behind them, deliberate footsteps, heavy, pacing, just out of range. "It's following," Jeff said, breath ragged. "No, it's hurting." They reached the clearing where their trucks were parked, or what was left of them. The vehicles sat in silence, tires slashed, one windshield shattered clean through from the inside. The ground around them was covered in deep impression, footprints, almost human, but longer, wider, and spaced too far apart. "Whatever did this walked on two legs," Huckleberry said quietly. He pointed at one print, pressed deep into the mud. It was nearly twice the length of his boot. Jeff tried to radio production for help, but the static that came through wasn't normal. Beneath the white noise, there was a sound, slow, heavy breathing. He froze. "Listen," he whispered, handing the receiver to Buck. It wasn't distortion, it was listening back. Then, a deafening crack echoed through the trees, a branch the size of a small tree snapping under immense weight. The forest exploded with sound, crashing footsteps, scattering leaves, the echo of something massive moving fast. "Move!" Russell shouted. They didn't stop running until they reached the ridge. No one dared look back. When they finally collapsed near the base, Jeff turned on his headlamp. A thin layer of mist had rolled in, and through it, something faint glowed in the distance. Two orange lights, unmoving, like eyes waiting just beyond the dark. No one spoke, not one of them, because every man there knew what they were looking at, and that it was looking right back. When daylight finally broke, the forest looked untouched, peaceful even. Birds had returned, and the heavy mist had burned away. But the men who emerged from that ridge weren't the same ones who'd gone in. Jeff's hands still trembled as he unpacked the cameras, desperate to find proof of what they'd seen. If they couldn't explain it, they needed at least to show it. But as he loaded the SD cards one by one into his laptop, a pit formed in his stomach. Half the files were corrupted. The timestamps jumped wildly, skipping entire hours. Others played only seconds before freezing on static. On one feed, the moment the creature's eyes appeared, the footage fractured into geometric shapes, like the data itself had been shredded. "This isn't damage," Jeff muttered. "It's erasure." Then he found something even stranger. 3 of the cameras had continued recording long after the crew stopped filming. The metadata confirmed the files were created several hours after they left camp. "That's impossible," Russell said. "The power was cut." Jeff opened the first file. For nearly 3 minutes it showed nothing, just the dark outline of the abandoned campsite. Then, movement. A massive shape passed across the frame, blocking out the firelight. Its outline was humanoid, but the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, torso unnaturally broad, a hand pressed against the lens for a single frame, the fingers wide and angular, ending in sharp, pointed tips. The feed cut out instantly. Maria, one of the production assistants, covered her mouth. That looks like it touched the camera." Jeff nodded slowly. "Because it did." The second file was worse. The audio was filled with a low humming frequency that caused the speakers to distort. Beneath it, faint but clear, was breathing, slow, deep, and rhythmic. When they ran a spectral analysis on the sound back at headquarters, the pattern wasn't random. It matched the cadence of human speech, but no words could be formed. Jeff turned off the monitor and sat in silence. "We didn't just film it," he said softly. "It filmed us." Within 24 hours, every drive containing that footage was seized by the network's legal department for review. The team never saw those files again. And Mountain Monsters was never the same after that night. The network called it routine data retrieval. Jeff called it what it really really was a cover-up. Within days, Destination America halted all field operations and ordered the AIMS team to return home. No explanations, no debrief, just silence. When Jeff pressed for answers, he was told the footage was under internal review due to technical irregularity. Yet the language in the emails made his skin crawl. Containment, liability, non-disclosure. Those weren't production terms, they were security ones. Crew members started quitting. The sound technician, Carl, left without warning, saying he'd heard something while reviewing the raw audio. Something breathing through the mic feed that wasn't human. Another crewman refused to sleep indoors after the shoot. "Walls won't help," he muttered, before walking away. Jeff tried to resume work on his research logs, but every copy of his field notes was missing. Even the external backup drive from his laptop, the one he always kept in his bag, had vanished. "That's when I knew," he said later. "Someone didn't want this story told." Weeks later, Jeff and Huckleberry met with Trapper to discuss what came next. The old man listened quietly, chain-smoking as Jeff explained everything: the corrupted files, the erased drives, the whispers in the recordings. Trapper didn't seem surprised. He finally leaned forward and said, "You think you saw it, but you didn't. You felt it, and that's worse." He warned them not to go back. "There are things in those woods that predate us," Trapper said, his voice grave, "things that don't like being named." When Mountain Monsters returned for the next season, the energy was different. The team laughed less, hunted more carefully, and never once returned to that hollow. Even stranger, the episode they filmed before the encounter was removed from rotation. Fans noticed, forums buzzed. Jeff stayed quiet, bound by NDAS and a promise to Trapper to leave it alone. But late one night, as Jeff reviewed archived footage for a retrospective, his computer froze for a full minute before displaying a file he didn't recognize. Unlabeled, no timestamp. He opened it. It was a single still frame. Their campsite, empty, but in the center of the image stood a dark figure, tall, featureless, staring directly into the lens. And in the bottom corner, text flickered for only a moment before vanishing. "Told you not to follow." Years passed, and the AIMS team continued filming new episodes, but the fire that once defined their hunts had dimmed. Fans noticed that Jeff, once the steady voice of logic, seemed quieter, more withdrawn. He rarely joked anymore, rarely stayed on camera for long. What viewers didn't know was that Jeff hadn't slept properly in months. Ever since that night in the hollow, something had changed. He'd wake to faint tapping on his windows, even when he stayed in hotels. His radio equipment, locked in his home office, would turn on by itself in the early hours, broadcasting static filled with faint breathing and, occasionally, the same guttural hum they'd recorded years before. He replaced every wire, every receiver, but the noise always returned. "It's not a malfunction," he told Buck one night. "It's recognition. It knows my signal." At first, Jeff kept it to himself. The team had already been through too much, and he didn't want to sound paranoid. But when Huckleberry visited to help test new gear, the same thing happened. The monitors powered on by themselves, and every sensor in the room spiked once, twice, then flatlined. "That's the same pattern as before," Huckleberry said, his voice shaking. "Exactly the same." Jeff's health started to decline soon after. He stopped sleeping entirely some nights, claiming he could hear movement outside his house, slow, deliberate footsteps circling his porch. Neighbors reported strange howls echoing through the holler behind his property, though no animal tracks were ever found. During a rare public appearance in 2022, fans asked him why Mountain Monsters felt different after Season 7. Jeff smiled faintly, but didn't answer right away. Finally, he leaned toward the mic and said, "Because some of us stopped hunting monsters, and some of us realized the monsters started hunting us." The audience laughed nervously, assuming it was just storytelling flair. But the look on Jeff's face said otherwise. That night, he packed up his remaining field gear and logged one final note into his research file. The entry was short, just one line that nobody but him ever saw. "It followed me home." When Jeff finally decided to speak publicly, it wasn't through a network interview or convention panel. It was during a quiet live stream viewed by barely a few thousand fans. His voice was tired, his expression haunted. For years, he'd kept the truth locked away behind contracts and silence, but that night, he couldn't hold it in anymore. "The show didn't end because of ratings," he began. "It ended because of what we found." He explained how one of the backup hard drives, long thought destroyed, had resurfaced. A former production editor had reached out anonymously, claiming to still possess fragments of the footage from that night in the hollow. Jeff said he watched it alone, in total darkness. What he saw confirmed everything he'd feared. The video began normally, shaky footage of the forest, night vision beams cutting through fog. But then came the movement. A tall, humanoid figure stepped from the tree line, shoulders hunched, eyes glowing faintly amber. It paused, staring into the camera before raising its hand, the same gesture seen on the corrupted tapes. The footage ended with the lens shaking violently before fading to black. Jeff looked straight into the webcam. "It wasn't human," he said, "and it wasn't afraid of us." After the stream ended, the video disappeared within hours. No one could find the archived link, not even through cached sites. The network refused to acknowledge it, and the editor who'd contacted Jeff deleted his account. Within days, speculation flooded the internet. Theories of government intervention, lost tapes, and a final warning from the AIMS team. But Jeff's final message was simple. "We thought we were hunting something wild," he said, "but it's older than the mountains, and it's not finished with us." He closed the stream with a long pause, then whispered the words Trapper once told him. "We didn't end mountain monsters. The mountain did." And with that, the screen went black, leaving only the sound of faint static and the sense that somewhere in those endless woods, the story still isn't over.